Hello, everyone. Welcome to Starfleet Tactical. I am Chris Weave here, not speaking for any employer, past, present, or future. I'm here with Pat Doyle, who presumably is doing exactly the same or not doing exactly the same thing.
I'm not saying nothing.
How are you, Pat?
I'm doing good. How's it going, Chris?
Oh, pretty good, pretty good. It was a busy, busy week. I'm prepping for a class. I can't really say I'm helping to teach. I'm really sort of functioning as the research assistant or the teaching assistant for it. I'm helping somebody else teach a class, but it means going through all the slides and sort of like putting them in English and things like that. So,
gotcha.
But it's gonna. So I get to do that for 3 days next week. How about you?
Just working. I was told I was exposed to COVID and to not go to work the last half of this week, so I've just been sitting at home. So nothing too exciting at this point.
Yeah, Rob Davidoff just commented that he could tell that I'm busy because I still haven't gone back and put it in the old comments. I'm several behind, and yeah, I just didn't get a chance to do it today. In fact, I was working on a short presentation for tonight when I get this email from the guy I'm team teaching the class with, or who's the main instructor for it, going, hey, I don't have these slides from you. Mm-hmm. Well, it's like, okay, 2 of the 3, it's like, let me resend them to you. I've already sent them once. Let me resend them. And the third one was, yeah, that's the first time I've ever seen that slide deck. I didn't know that slide deck existed. I can't really fix the formatting on slide decks that you don't send me. So he did that. But my COVID news for the week, I wasn't exposed except intentionally. So
it just so you know, the card you just showed just was glaring white. That's all anybody.
Well, it's the size and shape of a COVID vaccine card. So I figured everybody figured.
Very good.
That's indeed what it was. And so I got originally when my employer, the base that I work at, they sent out a note saying, hey, everybody, you where do you think you belong in it? Like, if you think that you should move up to we're going to have some vaccine at some point. We're trying to work ahead. If you think that you should be in the first group, let us know. Like, if you have to work on base because you're doing classified work and you have to be around other people or whatever, or you have comorbidities, et cetera. And while I didn't have to be on base, I do have a few medical issues that technically could bump me up to an earlier category. But I said, yeah, no, I'm working at home. I'm perfectly comfortable working at home. And basically 95% of what I can do at home. So I'm only going in very rarely. I go in about once every 2 weeks for about 2 hours. So no big deal. And then they come back and they say, oh, by the way, we want you to take on this project, and you're going to have to go to Hawaii in the near future. You're going to have to fly here and fly there and fly. So I'd heard all the horror stories about people trying to get COVID vaccines and having to call 10 pharmacies each day to see if they can get on the list to avoid wasting a dose and all this other stuff. And I was just trying to work myself up to it. And I was literally thinking, all right, when I finish this phone call, I need to get online and start doing that stuff and put together a little Excel spreadsheet. And next thing I know, there's a little ping, and I check my cell phone, and it's a text message from my pharmacy saying, how would you like to schedule your COVID vaccine shot? I went, yes, I would. That would be great. So I guess the moral of that story is that procrastination pays.
Well, yeah, plan early, plan often, right?
And then don't do anything.
Well, that's our lesson, right? In my experience, if you plan too early, somebody changes the plan on you later on, and then you just have to do it again. So
yeah, there's a lot of truth to that. So have you haven't had your shot yet, though, have you?
No, not yet. Not yet. I could theoretically, our airline will start getting it since we've been declared frontline workers, and then the military at some point may get a batch, and maybe I'll get it through them. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's sort of funny because I thought it was probably going to be something like that, and in my case, it was just the local pharmacy that I get all my prescriptions through.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's all luck of the draw these days.
I heard all these stories about people having to do like 3-hour round trips. My brother on Monday is getting a shot, and he's going to drive 2 hours each way to get the shot.
Oh, yeah.
And stuff like that. And literally the only reason I didn't walk is because it was raining. Otherwise, I would have gone ahead and walked there because my elliptical machine is currently broken. The pedals on it are broken, and Brian Haven is going to 3D print me some new pedals, but that hasn't happened yet. And so I have this like $3,500 elliptical machine that I can't get parts for because the company went out of business 4 years ago when I wasn't looking, and I can't use it right now. So I'm looking for opportunities to go out and go walking. So, but that's it for me. That's it for me. Let me see if there's anything that comes out really quickly to look at. I don't see anything that I immediately need to respond to. So Pat and I were talking earlier today, as we frequently do the day of. We can always tell how busy each other are, because if we're not busy, we generally have a phone call, usually on Wednesday?
Sure. Yeah, earlier in the week for sure.
Earlier in the week. And when it's, in this case, I think we talked like last night, and said, yeah, let's circle around again tomorrow early to mid-afternoon. And we finally got together about 4:00 this afternoon to talk about what we were going to talk about tonight. But we had both done some thinking, and Pat's got a couple of really good ideas, but I had started making some slides, so we decided to go with what I'm doing. But at some point, we want to go through and do an examination of yesterday's Enterprise, which is the metric that I use to judge all Star Trek products by. Like if there's a Star Trek movie on, I will ask myself, would I rather watch this movie or would I rather watch yesterday's Enterprise twice? And if I'd rather watch yesterday's Enterprise twice, then I don't watch whatever the other thing is. So what were the other ideas you had, Pat, since we're probably going to do them eventually?
Well, let's see. Talking about The Expanse, and I saw a comment in here about The Expanse.
Yes.
And the other person here had mentioned Babylon 5, since it tended to use the Newtonian, rather than airplanes in space, it's kind of the Newtonian movement, like Battlestar Galactica did and everything too. So we could certainly compare those various properties and stuff. I'm almost done with all the Expanse novels that I'm aware of. And, I've watched the TV show, and I've even been taking a few notes here and there. So at some point, a good detailed discussion about The Expanse would certainly be in order, I think. I think, potentially comparing a little bit to Battlestar Galactica and Babylon 5. The Expanse has the advantage, of course, of being the most recent. Battlestar Galactica was back in 2004, so that's actually a fairly old show at this point. And Babylon 5 is even a little bit older. So, and Space Above and Beyond is even a little older than that. So, The Expanse does, and then also talking about it a little bit in relation to the Honorverse, because The Expanse is primarily is mostly a missile throwing type. Long-range missiles, G-forces, and shooting down missiles and stuff, similar to the Honorverse, or at least has some similarities to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not nearly as technologically advanced, of course, as Honorverse is.
But that would be I think that would be an excellent topic. And then we also talked about just like doing a sort of a discussion about what we think space war might look like going forward in a period of time.
Yeah, exactly. How might that evolve given, given a certain set of assumptions that we make, how might that evolve?
Yes. Yeah. So those are the things that we've got on the plate. And then I still at some point want to go back and talk about that rotary container ship idea that we had. Maybe the right answer is there are other people that worked on that project. We can maybe bring one of them on for that.
Sure.
Another thing is maybe at some point we should talk about having our friend Peter Gold on. We could talk about Merchant Marine stuff. If you guys haven't seen it, there's a fantastic series by a guy named Nathan Lowell that starts off with the first book in the series is called Quarter Share, and it's a merchant marine in space. I don't think we've ever actually seen a warship, if I remember correctly, in the entire series. But it's basically merchant marines in space, and it's really, really, really good. Despite the fact that you could kind of make the argument that nothing ever happens in it, but it's just a fascinating background, fascinating across the board. So, yeah, Buddy's been asleep for the last hour. Now he's awake. So, but for tonight, we were going to talk about go back and talk about ship types in the Star Trek universe, specifically the ship type known as the Explorer. Should I go ahead and launch the slides?
Go for it.
All right, hold on just a second. I need to hit that, and I need to hit that. All right, can you see the slides?
No.
I think Lissa has to do something magical. Still can't see him?
Nope, nothing.
Earth to Lissa. Come in, Lissa. Yeah, the thing is I can see the slides. They're shared. Lissa might be having technical issues. I seem to recall the last time we tried to do this, me sharing the slides was about the time that she was rebooting her computer. So I'll go ahead and start talking about a few other things. Specifically, there was something I wanted, an announcement or two I wanted to make, so I put a slide in so I wouldn't forget. So I'm hosting an online wargaming conference called Connections Online. It's the latest in a series of Connections conferences. Connections is a conference that started off as a U.S. only conference back in 1991, 91, 92, something like that, created by a guy named Matt Caffrey. And there's now Connections conferences not only in the U.S. but also in the U.K., Canada, where the Canadians live, the Netherlands, France, Australia. They're talking about a Norway one, I think. They're talking about one in South America. Now we're doing an online one, and that's going to be the 12th through the 14th of April. So if you do a search, if you go to the armchairdragoons.com website, you can find the information on the Connections conference, and I think we're due to go live for registration on Monday, if I remember correctly. In addition, there's going to be a NavyCon conference, and that's scheduled for early June-ish. That's still a little tentative. I think we're aiming for June 10th. NavyCon is a conference that where people use science fiction examples to talk about real-world Navy issues. And so I've presented at that in the past, and I've been the producer for it. So that's going to be probably around the 10th of June. I had previously said that I was going to be part of this Joint Geeks of Staff podcast, but alas, I had to drop out of that project because I just don't have enough cycles. So, but they're still making... The NavyCon people are basically also doing a podcast, and it's pretty high quality, so it's worth going and taking a look at. So it looks like we got slides. Yay, slides. Somebody asked if I'd read Chain of Command by Frank Chadwick. I have not. Frank's a good guy. I don't know him very well, but I've known him for a long time because of wargaming stuff. And so I'm looking forward to reading that. I do have a copy of it. I just haven't read it yet. Okay, so let's go ahead and share the slides again, Lissa, if you're there.
Which one of your screens am I pulling up? Just
hang on. Go ahead. Use Chris's.
Okay.
I was trying to pull it up, see if I could do it.
Okay. All right, then. So we're going to talk about ship design in Star Trek. So you notice how I made it plural there because, as I've said before, I don't think that there's really one Star Trek. I think there's multiple Star Treks, and you can mix and match the things that you like from the various Star Treks because they're not entirely consistent. So I'm going to go through a few things that we've already talked about before, but just to refresh you all. So you may recall this from Winchell Chung's Atomic Rockets of the Space Patrol website. It's a trinary graph that it's talking about mass allocation in World War I warship design, so dreadnought battleship design, and applying that to other warship designs. So I made the observation that this doesn't take into account cargo, endurance, doctrine, technology levels, ship size, or politics behind any of this stuff. It's just strictly how you allocate mass for those three primary areas. But there's lots of reasons why a design, even a good design for another doctrine, might not work for you because you don't have the technology to make it work. Your doctrine doesn't emphasize those sorts of things. You need, basically, it's a square peg in a round hole. So my conclusion here is that the triangle graph can help you understand possible answers, but it's not the answer in and of itself. I then talked about, converting this to Star Trek. So to date, we've been talking about mass trade-offs, right? The mission was that it's a warship, but it was about mass. But you can use the same sort of technique to think in terms of mission emphasis. So you can focus on how much of the ship design is driven by a particular requirement. And that's kind of where we're going to be in today, that we're going to be talking about stuff related to that. But like I said, it's not the answer. The triangle graph is not the answer. It's a tool to help understand possible answers. And I also gave a rough Star Trek proposal. And that's kind of the framework that I'm going to use to here, in that you've got combat as part of the mission of protecting the Federation. You've got exploration as part of the find strange new worlds part of it. And then you've got propulsion and endurance as sort of a thing that allows you to do those other things. So that's all the stuff that we've looked at previously. And now Pat and I are going to have a conversation about some of the new stuff. Now, I should start off by saying Pat's a lot more up to speed on a lot of these Star Trek things than I am. I'm really kind of, let me make it a little bit bigger because I can do that. I'm not as up to speed on this stuff because it's been a while since I've seen, there's big chunks of the Star Trek universe that I haven't seen recently, and I need to go back and look at it again. And you have the standard caveat of, between the TV shows and the movies and the technical manuals, some of which are more canon than others, and the computer games and the role-playing games, you've got a wide variety of answers that don't necessarily match with each other, and we're not really getting into how things change over time. I'd like to do that at some point, sort of put down a graph of when ships were built, etc. But then the question is, which timeline are you using for all of that stuff? A lot of the stuff eventually just gets ignored. Like the number of times that they just go, we need a model of a ship, so we'll just throw a model of a ship in there.
Well, there's a pretty well established timeline that Mr. Okuda went back and put together. So
yeah, so the timeline is actually probably the easiest bit, but there's I seem to recall floating in the background at Wolf 359. Isn't there something like a Firefly or something like that?
I don't think so, because that show wasn't even out then.
Okay, there was your good point by you. I want to say there was something really weird floating in the background.
There's in the foreground there was basically what appears to be the hull, the secondary hull of motion picture version of the Enterprise, and it's pretty distinctive because you see the big windows, if I remember correctly, that are down there, in the recreation area. So
okay,
but no, I mean there are a whole bunch of them, and as a matter of fact, if you look at this book, there are lots of different varieties of Federation ships that are dead. I think they did some level of kit bashing and stuff. They took a lot of whatever they had, but I believe the Wolf 359 thing is where quite a few of the different ship classes come from. So
Rob Davidoff points out there's a Millennium Falcon in First Contact.
Really?
Yeah, and I want to say that might be what I'm thinking of. Somebody else asked if we can get a copy of that trinary design sheet. If you go to Winchell Chung's Atomic Rockets of the Space Patrol, it's just a graphic there. You can download it from his webpage.
Yeah, they're also with Battlestar Galactica. In one of the scenes, there is a ship that looks reminiscent of kind of like a lighter design of the original Galactica. I mean, it's like a variation, like it'd be a destroyer or something like that. And then you end up seeing that in Firefly as well, I believe. And then they incorporated that design into the game Battlestar Galactica Deadlock, and it's called the Defender. And that came from a guy,
Steve something.
Hostile Intent. He was making a game, or he adopted that. I don't know which came first. But
the guy's name is Steve something, and he did some fantastic
design that's gotten around.
Yeah. He did all sorts of fantastic work, and I can't remember what his name is. There's a Firefly class transport in the Battlestar Galactica miniseries also.
Matter of fact, here it is.
Ah, cool. Yep. I love that design.
Yeah.
So in the scene where Laura Roslin is finding out that she's got cancer, like at one point she's in like the foyer of a building, and out through a window, like a skylight type window, you see a Firefly transport go by.
Really?
Yeah.
Cool. All right.
So
it's good that they reuse those.
Yes. So
and actually, I'm sorry. I'll point out one other thing. In the since we're just talking about references to different movies and different properties, for those of you who have seen the movie The Martian, if you read the Expanse novels, they make reference to a freighter or other ship called the Mark Watney. It might be a destroyer or something like that, but a Martian destroyer. It's a Martian vessel, but it's called the Mark Watney.
That's fantastic. I love that. So I resisted reading The Martian for years because Amazon kept foisting it on me, and I kept telling it no, because it's a Robinson Crusoe story, and I'm not really big into Robinson Crusoe stories because Robinson Crusoe is a guy from a high-tech civilization who got to go camping against his will. And I hate camping, right? I'm not interested in going camping, and I don't read science fiction to read stories about people who go camping against their will. And so I kept pushing it off. And then a friend of mine sends me this text message some Saturday morning saying, I'm not getting anything done because I'm reading The Martian and I can't put it down. I just can't put it down. And I went, really? He goes, oh yeah, it's fantastic. And I went, really? And he goes, yeah, it's great. And I went, okay, I'm looking for an audiobook. I guess I'll do that. And so I started it the next day on Sunday, and I was totally and completely hooked almost immediately. So much so I got a guy at my office hooked on it, and he really liked it too. And when I came into work on Friday, I said, I almost took today off just so I could stay home and listen to the book. At which point he said, yeah, I almost did also. So I saw the movie twice in the first 22 hours it was out.
And yeah, I own a copy of the movie. The other thing, the audiobook, I've not actually read the paper copy, but I've listened to the audiobook. It was read by a guy named R.C. Bray, and he just does a fantastic job. Sometimes I'll listen to a novel just because he read it. But Will Wheaton is now the current reader of the book. So I have not bought the updated copy or gotten an updated copy of it. But
yeah, and you know, the next time I go to listen to it, it'll be interesting to see which one it gives me. I've got the other one on my computer. I had downloaded it to my computer, so I should be able to listen to the R.C. Bray version.
Yeah.
But as I understand it, it was a money thing, to which my response is, pay him what he wants.
Yeah.
Just
yeah. No,
pay
R.C.
him what he
Bray is
wants.
great. So yeah, and now nothing. I've read lots of books read by Will Wheaton, and they're also really well done. So they're both good. So
yeah, I don't mean this. I wasn't trying to slam Will Wheaton.
No, I know that. Yeah.
But I just want to make sure everybody else does too. But the R.C. Bray version is just, he's pitched. I mean, I don't hear Matt Damon. I hear R.C. Bray when I think about that. I spend the entire movie looking at him going, what's wrong with his voice?
Yeah, and it is first person. Yeah, I mean, in the audiobook, first person, it's clearly him, like, just telling the first person account of being stuck on Mars, and it's fantastic. 3/4
of the book is him doing log entries. So, but in any event, if you look on this slide off on the right hand side, you sort of have this is the model of how I think about Star Trek. I sort of start off with various sources. Usually I gravitate towards the original series in TNG. Every now and then there'll be something in Beta Canon that I think is interesting. And I don't mean to say that I ignore Deep Space Nine and all the rest of it. It's just for things like this, those are the ones I sort of gravitate to. All that stuff is sort of filtered through Sternbach and Okuda and what they did with the tech manuals. The next step in all of this is having conversations with Pat Doyle and Andy Presby, both of whom have done a whole lot of thinking about this. And once it's sort of percolated through this, it's like making coffee with 3 coffee filters. Once it's gotten all the way through, then I come up with my own headcanon and all of this. And do you recognize that Holy Grail image?
It does look very familiar, but I won't hazard a guess unless it's from it's probably a Monty Python thing.
I'm like 95% sure it's the Monty Python one.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So, but in any event, that's sort of the process I went through to get to where I'm at right now. So, okay, buddy, are you going to be good or are you going to be buddy? You're going to be buddy. Okay. All right. I need to remember that I need to click on PowerPoint, not on StreamYard.
Yeah, others have confirmed Monty Python.
Okay. All right, so let me offer you a few observations, and I've got some examples of ships here that sort of point in that general direction. First of all, Starfleet really likes the following things: detachable primary hulls, secondary hulls, so sort of having it split up. Also, I could put in there, detachable engines, navigational deflectors, multiple engines. I didn't talk about sensors and stuff here. I'm going to there because you don't really see the sensors from the outside, but having lots and lots of sensors, and we'll get into that in a moment. Is there anything that I'm missing from that list, Pat?
Shuttle bay in the back. I mean, these are just small variations on what you've already talked about. You've got primary, secondary hull. Essentially, everything's detachable in case it goes. You can get the people part away from the explodey bits.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of reasons for that. I'll talk about some of them when we get to the next slide, but I think some of them are also it makes things, at least in theory, modular. Right, in theory, you can take a new set of engines and put them on, or you can they don't seem to upgrade ships by replacing their parts that way, but what they do seem to do is kit bash new starships.
Well, so I think some of that was a response to the Dominion War and stuff, because in DS9 we see a few other kit bashed ships.
Right. But I'm thinking primarily of the Nebula class, which predates the war by a considerable margin.
Right.
And it looks like it's their answer to the question of how can we get a Galaxy class equivalent on a smaller hull. Well, the internal volume is probably the same. Now, you will of course note that I made that the metric I used when putting these ships together was making sure that they were all the same length for the image, not making them to scale. So they're dramatically not to scale there.
Yeah. So the Nebula is a tough thing. I don't actually see it like, I'm not sure where I read it, but I think I read somewhere where they talk about the Nebula as being the less expensive version of the Galaxy. Save a little bit of money, you get a few more of them, all that kind of stuff. But if you assume that saucer and the Galaxy saucer are the same size, then you have the same amount of internal volume in the Nebula. The only thing I can assume
is where does it save the money?
where is your savings, unless you're just putting either less expensive black boxes or you got more cargo or storage space.
Or apparently the really expensive part of a starship is the struts.
Yeah, but even those are the same struts, just turned the other way.
Oh, good point.
So and frankly, I think you even add, you got that bar that goes up the back to hold on to the pod. So you actually have more internal volume and more flexibility with those pods. So assuming, and I believe it's correct, that, that saucer is the same saucer that's on a Galaxy, then, unless you just have lower grade equipment or less redundancy, you're not really saving that much. And if you got the same crew, we're assuming, I know they don't use dollars in Star Trek, but everything still costs something, whether it's in energy or time or whatever, or resources. But having a similar amount of crew on board, your people is an awful lot of your.
Yeah, it does. I've never really understood the economics of ship construction in this universe, because I don't think that I think that they're kind of making it up as they go along.
Yeah.
A question popped up, why put the bridge on the top? They give the official answer is because the bridge module can be easily replaced by just sort of popping it out and popping a new one in, which explains why the bridge set looks different for every one of the movies.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, actually, if you go to YouTube, there's a wonderful little video by a guy named Junkyard. Junkyard is the name of the channel, where he goes through all the different bridge configurations we saw for the Enterprise D over the course of the series. And it basically, they were constantly changing that bridge. Mm-hmm. Constantly. There were multiple upgrades every season as seats appeared and disappeared, and the carpet changed color and the trim changed, and they moved this around and they added lights here. And it's basically, there were two if you go through and look through it, you can pretty much tell, just by looking at the bridge set when that episode was filmed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I think so. They give this explanation that they can pop the module out. Well, okay. My responses to that are: what's the big deal with switching the bridge module? Why is it so special? You would think that there'd be stuff all throughout the ship that you'd want to replace. And if you're going to have to rip the ship up to replace all that other stuff, what's the extra headache of replacing the bridge module? Especially when you can beam so much of that stuff into the location and then use anti-grav lifters to move it around. It's not like, it's not like you have to cut big holes in the hull to get the components in. You can just sort of beam them in and assemble them locally. So I don't think that explanation has never made a whole lot of sense to me. And if I were designing this ship, I would put the bridge relatively deep inside. I'd probably put it like surrounded by the computer core, on the theory that if my computer core got whacked, I probably don't need a bridge anymore anyway. If the shot can get that deep into the ship, I don't think I'm really worried about the bridge.
So, yeah. And if you do have so some people so you're correct, deep inside, most protection, like in the Battlestar Galactica, 2003 Battlestar Galactica, that's where their CIC was located, deep inside the armored hull of the ship. So makes sense. As opposed to the original Battlestar Galactica, where it's this nice little target up on the outside of the top and outside of the ship. Now, the other things are, well, hey, you put the bridge on the bottom, maybe it's better protected. Well, no, it's not, because remember, space is 3D. You can protect that bridge on top by rolling the ship compared to where your enemy is. So, assuming it's somewhere on the outside of the hull, you protect it by maneuvering the ship in some way to not give somebody a sight line to it. So presumably also, because we see it in the Klingons, there's something about it that there's an advantage to having your bridge out there. And, we don't see the weapons, unless you're totally unshielded, we don't see the weapons poking lots of holes into the structure. Because, internally, I do have an answer, tongue in cheek. If you buried the bridge deep inside the ship, it wouldn't matter, because all the panels are explosive anyways.
Yes.
With fuses that go from different parts of the ship and lead into the bridge. So you could put it in the middle anyways. It doesn't matter. It's the panels that are explosive.
Yes, and they're made out of rocks.
And made out of rocks. Exactly. So, all right.
So it doesn't make...
I've sidelined you for about 15 minutes here.
No. We're right where I want to be. So in any event, those are the things that I think Starfleet likes: detachable primary hulls, secondary hulls, navigational deflectors, multiple engines. Well, I'll talk about why I think they like those things in just a moment. There are some exceptions that we see here, right? The Miranda doesn't have a navigational deflector, and it doesn't have a secondary hull. It's not really clear as to what's detachable and what isn't on it, but I think it can probably... It wouldn't surprise me if you couldn't detach the engines and the pod, with the weapons pod, but everything else is pretty much together. The Constellation, that 4-engine thing that Jean-Luc Picard used to fly, doesn't have a navigational deflector, and it doesn't really have a secondary hull either. Voyager doesn't have a secondary hull, and...
Well, Voyager has we don't know that it's detachable, but it still maintains the similar aesthetic.
Well, okay. I guess it seems to blend a lot more in the same way that that Enterprise E kind of blends a lot more, and I'll go into that a little bit in just a moment. But as I say in the big red letters there, there's a metric shit ton of Canon designs out there. I would argue that a lot of them are just thrown on the screen because they needed some ships floating around doing stuff in the background or whatever, so they just sort of threw ships out there. We're actually trying to bring order out of chaos here, so forgive me if I cherry pick the data a little bit. Because I actually think that you kind of have to cherry pick the data here, because I think that if you try to fit the line to all the data points, you'll discover that it's just a cloud. And so I try to have a methodology to cherry pick the data, and that methodology is going through. What's that? So
you talk about cherry picking. You can't really read this, but I have a list of the different ships over here, and then up along the top I have a lot of different sources, from Sternbach's book, Ex Astra Scientia, the DS9 Tech Manual, and I've got radically different lengths and widths and stuff for the different ships. And so in the end, I did have to cherry pick because lots of people, even people who printed books, have lots of different information and ideas on how big or long the ships are.
Yeah, I mean, and for a lot of this stuff, when you add into the fact that I'm not convinced that they were consistent when they put them on the screen, in the end, it's just like, all right, I'll try to do my best to come. I'm trying to tell a consistent story.
Yeah.
Right. So I will cherry pick in order to, if I can tell a consistent story, I will cherry pick to get to a consistent.
And I will point out one of those columns here is Axanar for the
cool.
for the bird of prey, the raptor, the D4, D5, and D6 and D7, because they got the D7 right. So everything else, all the way down, is scaled pretty well. So yeah, those are canon numbers.
Okay, so given those observations, what does that tell us? Well, first of all, let's talk for a second about the idea of an explorer, because that's really the thing I decided I wanted to explore the explorer tonight. Memory Alpha specifically talks about exploration vessels as being a type of spacecraft designed for exploring unknown regions of space. So the unknown regions of space is kind of the important part about this stuff. It's not for tooling around within the borders of the Federation necessarily. It's expanding that area. It's boldly going where no man has gone before, as much as the fact that in TNG they seem to spend an awful lot of time going to places within the Federation boundaries, to the degree that boundaries even make sense. You don't see the term explorer, at least I don't remember seeing the term explorer in reference to ships of an explorer type until we get to the TNG technical manual. Before that, there was very much a predilection towards military type names for them. But then once TNG came around, you started hearing things like explorers. And so, Pat, if I'm getting any of this wrong, if you know of a better source on this, or you just want to add some nuance, chime in.
Sure.
So
no, the tech manual talks about an explorer as basically the largest amongst other series of classes, which are basically cruisers, and cruisers is just kind of a vague term. And then you've got cruisers, scouts, and then they specifically talk about if it's craft, then it's intended to be a shorter range thing like a shuttle and stuff, even if it has a warp engine.
Yeah.
So, but yes, the explorers are generally considered the largest of the ships. The only thing and this kind of goes back to your previous slide there. We didn't quite get a chance to chime in on this, but and this comes through the actually most of this comes from Andy, so I'll parrot some of his stuff, but that the navigational deflector probably makes a ship faster.
Yes.
And speed is useful, or maybe it makes your travel a little more efficient or something too. But we don't see the Miranda class with the navigational deflector.
Hold that thought.
Okay, go ahead.
You're going to the next slide. That's going to be the next slide. So I made some assumptions here. One is that navigational deflectors manipulate subspace like warp engines do. And if you look in the TNG technical manual, that seems to be what they're saying, as I remember correctly. Now, there's other things that are sort of along the center line through that dish. Like when they turn that dish into an emitter, it's because it's also a sensor dish. But the deflector part of it seems to be that you need the big dish because you're pushing the subspace field out in a way. Also, for what it's worth, I think I said like warp engines. I should have said like warp engines and tractor beams, because tractor beams also seem to be a manipulation of subspace.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, the implication here is that your navigational deflector probably doesn't work if your warp engines aren't online.
Well,
and we see a data point on that in the motion picture,
right,
when they have that wormhole problem. because their engines aren't working properly. And
they can't move out the navigational. Yeah, it'd be interesting to go back and just listen to that scene.
Yeah, and
so
it may be I might be putting 2 and 2 together and getting 22 here, but I'm sort of starting. And this will become important when we start talking about the Constellation class later on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the second assumption I have is that one of the reasons why you have secondary hulls is to prevent is so that you can basically have your warp core and all the things that go boom, like the antimatter supply, away from the people parts of the ship, and so that you can break the ship in half and get the people parts away from the part that goes boom.
Yes.
Right. And we saw that with Enterprise D coming to, they let Counselor Troy drive once and she crashes the ship. Actually, that's an easy joke to make. I'm really glad they put Deanna Troi in a position where she easily had to pull off the hardest job that we've seen anyone have. I can't remember, was she helm or ops for that? She was helm because Data was there, right?
Oh yeah.
Data
was there, so she had taken the helm, right? Are you talking about when they crashed on Viridian 3?
Yeah.
In Generations?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. I thought you were talking about when she was she had she was the bridge watch officer because she was working on her quals. Okay.
I'm talking when she was piloting the ship when the primary hull was forced to do the crash landing. I mean that was the ultimate test of her ability in what was not her primary job, and she did an excellent job of it. And I'm really glad they gave the character the chance to do that, even though it does lead to cheap jokes like the one I made about her crashing the ship.
As we say, any landing you can walk away from.
Yes. Yes.
And actually, maybe they had an equivalent book of a book that I read when I was learning as a pilot, How to Crash an Airplane and Survive. There might be How to Crash the Saucer section and Survive.
Yeah, well, I mean, they said in the Next Gen Tech Manual, there was a procedure for it.
There is a procedure in there. I was just going to point that out.
There's a standard operating procedure to do it, but it also said they decided not to expend a space frame, a primary hull space frame, to test it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as an indicator that it's expensive.
Yes, it's expensive
in some way, shape, or form.
And it's an interesting salvage situation too. Although you could probably just yank it off of the tractor beam. Is my guess. But looking at that thing as it, as an analyst, I would immediately, if I heard that something like that had happened and I were working for Starfleet, my first response would be, I want all the data. Because they had to have black boxes. I want to interview the crew. I want to find out what worked and what didn't, and what did they have to adjust, and all the rest of it. So, because that was you don't get real world data like that very often.
No.
So my third assumption is that Starfleet will experiment with new designs. Occasionally, they'll try something, and that short-lived designs are generally unsatisfactory designs. If they try something new, if there's a new type of ship, and then they don't build any more of that type of thing, or the ship doesn't hang around for a very long time, then that it doesn't mean that it's a failure, but it means they decided to go in a different direction. Conversely, long-lived designs must have been considered successful for some reason. So, for instance, you don't see Constitution-class ships very much beyond the era of the movies. They kind of go away. But you see Excelsiors and Mirandas forever. So Starfleet apparently considered those designs to be really, really successful. And they, even if the Constitutions had a high accident rate or a high mortality rate, their response wasn't to build more of those. Their response was to build other things instead.
Well, I think they, if the Explorer is usually the premier vessel, and so they'll throw so it's not that the the Constitution class and that lineage was unsuccessful. I think it's that, hey, we want to test out this transwarp and a bunch of new tech. Let's throw it in this bigger ship. And now the Excelsior is the focus. And, because we still saw that they did the Ambassador class and the Galaxy class. And then Excelsior was relegated to, as the captain of the Hood said, hauling my butt back and forth between planets,
Yeah, and one of the interesting things is that they, explorers constantly get bigger. I think there's a reason for that. But let me go back to this bit a little bit about experimenting with new designs and isolating, about what it means when you're experimenting with new designs and stuff. What I don't think a lot of people appreciate is that small differences in technology can lead to a different answer. And sometimes you can do all the modeling in the world that you want to do, but the only way to really tell is to get operational experience by building something and trying it out. And so I think that that's what happens with a lot of this stuff is they build it and they try it out. And they may conclude that, in theory and practice are the same, but in practice they frequently are not. And so we'll try it out and see if we like that better. Mm-hmm. It's also the case that it might be that, like, what? That worked just fine. But there are some other reasons why we don't want to go down that path. Like, it worked for what we wanted to do, but it had unintended effects. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the next slide, which I'm going to go to right now. So I would argue, I think, that an Explorer generally has the features listed there. Extensive sensor suite. Okay, that's not really surprising. Navigational deflector gives it a high speed. And so if you look at, I don't think we have Canon numbers on, say, the Miranda, for instance. But if you look, but the numbers that I have seen, the sort of Canon-ish numbers I've seen, seem to indicate that a Miranda is slower than the Enterprise. A Miranda is actually bigger. If you do the internal volume calculation, there's a YouTube video that does that internal volume calculation and concludes that the Miranda actually has a larger internal volume. Yeah. Maybe when you subtract off, maybe it's got a bigger shuttle bay, so the people portion isn't as big, but it's got a internal volume. It's got a greater internal volume overall, but it's slower. A larger ship gives you high endurance, which is useful because the missions are long. Detachable primary hull gives you a long duration emergency lifeboat. And that can be either something that you park in an orbit around the planet, or you land on a planet and then you scream for help. Hey, we're stuck here, but we're on the planet, we've got power, we've got enough antimatter with us, we've got power, we've got our fusion generators, we've got enough power, we're just going to hang out here until you come and rescue us. Think about the recurring instances in the original TV series where Kirk and the gang go someplace because they just got a distress signal from some ship that had sent the distress signal like 50 years previously, and they're just now getting around to checking out what happened to it. So
I think that's the Cage.
I'm sorry, what?
The Cage, and I think Where No Man Has Gone Before. So a couple early episodes.
Yeah, and what wasn't there?
There's probably others.
Charlie X.
Yeah, that was, they met up with a freighter that was carrying him, who had been rescued or something. He had been rescued or something like that. And
so there's reason to think that when you go out exploring, you might end up camping against your will. And so this is their way of making sure that they got a really nice tent if they have to camp against their will.
Yeah. Yeah.
Multiple engines increases the durability of the ship, and the likelihood that you got at least one working engine to get home, and it probably also makes you faster. You want to be faster because if you're going where no man has gone before, that's a long ways away.
Well, the other thing to consider, by the next generation era, the Federation is bigger and bigger in each one of these eras. That leaves a larger volume and a larger distance to get from Earth.
Which is one of those reasons why, they started putting families on board. It's because I'm sure that, Starfleet's really cool. And I think everybody listening to us would join in a heartbeat if they could. I mean, I would. But on the flip side, if you've got a family, it's like, hey, guess what? The 5-year mission is now a 10-year mission.
Well, yeah, they talk about on the Stargazer, Picard captained it for 23 years, and supposedly, I can't remember, someone will have to correct me, how many, first contacts and stuff he had on that mission, or, on that, for whatever reason, he was practically a legend after commanding that little ship for a long time. I did read the autobiography of Jean-Luc Picard. It's just one of the Star Trek novels, but it talks about during the Cardassian War, he was just left as kind of acting as a supply ship back and forth. Didn't really get involved in the combat part of things too much until he was attacked at the end when he was told to make overtures for peace.
Weapons and shields, okay. There's stuff out there, you might need to deal with it. And the secondary hull, because you might need to detach the parts that go boom. And all these things actually sort of point towards having a larger ship with a large crew. I think it's worth talking a little bit about the ideas of capability and capacity. Those of you who've worked with the military have probably heard about this distinction. Capability is the ability to do the thing. Capacity is the ability to do the thing a lot or to do lots of different things at the same time. And so you can have the capability to do something, but if you've got, this is one of the problems you run into with smaller naval vessels, is they might have the capability to do a bunch of different things, but the guys who do the different things do multiple things. So that's one of the problems with minimal manning, is that, I can do A, or I can do B, or I can do C, but it's an or, it's not an and. When the U.S. sold the Perry-class frigates to the Australians cut the crew in half. And the thing is, we could do air defense and helo ops and ASW all at the same time, but they ran into limitations on what they could do at the same time because some of those guys were cross-trained and they had to do multiple things. And the other thing is being able to do it 24 hours a day, 365 a year, right? So it may be that, okay, if you're going to do that, you got to go wake guys up because you only got one shift of guys that do that, as opposed to having 3 shifts of guys that do that.
Yeah. And it's personnel costs that actually end up costing more.
Yeah.
It's just a modern problem or modern issue. People cost more money than all the equipment.
Yeah, and it's basically because, those people can't be at sea all the time. So if you figure they spend half the time ashore and half the time at sea, then right there you've doubled the amount of people you need to have. And it's really not half. It's probably more like a third of their time at sea. And then eventually they get out and you got to replace them with new guys that aren't as competent, et cetera. By the time you figure it out, to have one guy at sea, probably need 4 or 5 guys who have the exact same job description just for that one dude.
Yeah. So if that infrastructure cost out and training cost, and then you got to have entire bureaucracies to tell all those people where to go, and all that. Yeah. So yes, you need a whole bureaucracy to run it.
Yeah. And so I think that's one of the reasons why they have large crews, is because they need to have the ability to do a whole bunch of stuff simultaneously.
Right.
So the exceptions to this, to basically that chart up above, I would argue are explainable. Let's take a look at them real quick. So the Miranda class really aren't explorers, right? I would argue they're designed for service within the Federation boundaries. They're don't have a navigational deflector. They're slower. Can they boldly go? Yes. Can they go where no man has gone before? Well, yeah, they technically can, but they're not the preferred ship to go send it there. Now, they clearly were a successful design because they were around forever, but I don't think that they're the thing that you go and you send to a place the first time. And, we saw that, right? We saw in Wrath of Khan, they're going back to a system that was first surveyed 20 years previously, or however long it had been previously, right?
Yep.
It was a return ship. So it wasn't a first-time survey.
And if you read the novel and look at the demeanor in the Wrath of Khan, they're bored out of their mind and they want to be done with this mission.
Yeah.
They're not doing anything that is interesting or exciting. They're just going. They've just been assigned to a scientist and are going wherever she tells them.
Yeah.
And she tells them no whenever they have an idea. Except one time, and it gets a lot of them killed.
The Constellation class ships clearly are explorers, or described as such, but now this is something that I can't remember if I had this conversation with you, but I definitely had it with Andy. His theory is that one of the reasons why it's got 4 engines isn't just to be fast, but because basically, instead of using a navigational deflector to manipulate subspace to deflect things, it's manipulating the warp bubble using its engines. And so basically it's basically doing something funky with the extra engines to do it. And if you think about it, there's a lot of reasons why that would make sense, right? Because now you've got a built-in redundancy in your engines. Hey, we'll just build extra engines instead, as opposed to having this other unique piece of gear, right? If you've got a broke engine, a navigational deflector may not help you with that situation much, because you might be pushed slower enough that the navigational deflector isn't as needed. But if you've got 3 engines, you can probably go almost as fast as you could with 4. So, okay, let's try that experiment. Let's see if that works. But it's the only ship like that we saw. And they didn't seem to build very many of them. So while Stargazer apparently had an outstanding successful career, doesn't sound like this was an idea that they decided to double down on later.
Yeah. The other thing I noticed is it's got two impulse engines on the thing.
Yes.
I'll just throw this out as a theory. We can talk to Andy later, and he can. But those warp engines are probably very heavy. So probably to maneuver at sublight, it might need 2 impulse engines, or plus getting some extra maneuverability out of the deal.
Yeah, or it might just be that they grabbed off-the-shelf engine components rather than designing a new impulse engine. Yeah. There's parts of Stargazer when you look at it. When you look at the Constellation class, doesn't it just kind of look like a ship where they said, "This is the Starfleet equivalent of the SLS. We've got all this old shuttle gear around. Let's just build a new rocket out of it."
Yeah.
It's really kind of what it looks like they did. The Intrepid class ships are explorers, but they can land on a planet, so you don't need to separate a primary hull in order to be able to land on a planet. They can just land the main ship on the planet. And Starfleet, between that and the Sovereign class, it looks like there might have been some doctrine change in the immediate post-TNG period where they said, okay, you know what, this separating the primary hull isn't as important anymore. Or maybe in the case of the Sovereign class, it's just like, you know what, we're concerned about some warship stuff. We're designing a ship that has the attributes of a warship, of a fast warship, that also would be a good explorer. Okay, it'll be a good enough explorer. It's not an optimized explorer, but it'll be a good enough explorer later on. Both
of those ships can eject the warp core, so they don't. We saw both ships eject their warp cores. And I believe that's how they detach the exploding stuff from the people part.
Yeah, well, in the Galaxy class can too.
Yeah. Yep. So you got multiple options there.
Yeah. So this tells me that maybe the technology has gotten to the point where they're just more comfortable with it. One of my bosses he was an A7 pilot who converted over to F-18s for his squadron CO tour. And at one point he was really upset with his pilots because they weren't doing, in the A7, one of the things you did is you prepared these, basically they're the equivalent of AAA trip tickets, so that when your navigation system went down, you had these paper maps that you prepared for the mission so that you could navigate when your navigation system went down. And his F-18 pilots were just like, they were slacking, they weren't doing it. And he was getting really pissed off about this until finally the XO just sat him down and said, look, the system doesn't fail. It just doesn't. I mean, yeah, got it. A7, that system failed. F-18, bulletproof, does not go down. It just doesn't. You're asking these guys to do something that they know is a waste of time. Yeah. Because the technology's gotten better. So I think that that's part of what's going on here, is that Starfleet got increasingly comfortable. They no longer viewed this as like, oh shit, I think we just tickled the genie a little too much. Well, and they just got more comfortable with having it close to the people parts.
Another real world example of tech getting better is the 747, 4 engines made to fly across the oceans and stuff like that, right? Now we have 767s and 777s, only 2 engines. Why are we comfortable with only having 2 engines when there might not be any place to land? It's because the engines are more reliable. That's why you don't.
And more powerful.
And more powerful. You don't see 4-engine airplanes anymore or very often, because that represents a huge additional maintenance cost. And the FAA is now comfortable with the engine reliability.
Yeah. And one of the things I've really gotten into during the time of the COVID lockdown is listening to videos about the aviation industry. And so between the Simple Flying channel, DJ's Aviation, and just, general longer form videos about things like that, like there was an FAA decision where the FAA authorized overwater flights with I can't remember how long the abort period was, because it's usually an X number of hours on with one engine down. Mm-hmm. And they like doubled the number of hours from like 3 to 6 or something like that. Maybe it was longer than that. And when they did that, it's like, yep, we're just not going to build 4-engine planes anymore, because now every place can do it, or we can get them virtually everywhere now. So, and now you've got like even 737s doing some insane trips with the late model 737s. So, but so I think Starfleet just got more comfortable with the technology. The technology was better. It was more reliable. They weren't as worried about it. And they sort of, between things like building a small ship that had all the capability to land, to be an explorer yet still be small, I think they just got to the point where there was a doctrine change. And what I really want to do is go back, and this is going to be like a major research project, which is why I didn't do it for tonight, is go back and try to sort of figure out where those doctrine changes were and fill in a lot of the cracks, because you're going to have to fill in a lot of the cracks. It's unfortunate that this is the sort of discussion that usually doesn't make it into something like a role-playing game, because, some of the people that have done the role-playing games have done great work, but they don't necessarily think about things this way, right? So I think from that standpoint, we'll end up writing the doctrine when we do this. Wouldn't be the first time.
No.
So I think that's it. Yeah, that's it for what I had for slides. Any other comments, Pat?
No. No, that was good.
So I'm going to try to go through. I keep saying this. I am going to try to go through all the comments and see if there's anything there. Yep, ETOPS. Rob Davidoff is talking about the ETOPS stuff, which is what does all that stuff. But I am going to try to go through all the comments and see what I can find there and respond. So, any last words, Pat?
No. Have a great evening, everybody. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.
All right. I think we're done then.
All right. Take care.
See you later, everybody.